few weeks back, I talked about stress and some of the benefits, including the fact that stress identifies your weak spots so you can improve them, and that stress allows you, having times of high stress can allow you to be grateful for the times of relatively lower stress. But I think I missed out on one big key aspect and benefit of stress, which is stress not only can help you identify weak places, but it literally can help your brain function better and learn better if you know how to use it. So I will talk about how stress helps you learn in this video. Stay tuned. I'm Alec from Easier Habits, and I coach overthinking entrepreneurs in how to turn their anxiety and overwhelm and procrastination into unstoppable execution. So I watched a video a few weeks back by Alex Hormozi, who was relating an interesting story where he had a friend say, "Hey, can you speak at my conference?" And they had a big venue booked, and he assumed, his friend had a following, so he assumed that the venue would be pretty full. And instead, he walks on stage, and there's very few people in the audience, and the people who are in the audience are like very hostile or cold. It's like really not a good venue to have brought Alex Hormozi in, and he felt really embarrassed. But what he does, he has a habit of that's interesting, is when he feels heightened emotion, he thinks heightened emotion gets imprinted on your brain in a indelible way. And so when I'm in a heightened emotion, what do I want to learn? Like, that's an opportunity to really engrave something into your brain. What do I want it to be? And so he thought about what he could have done in his delivery, or what he learned in his delivery that could have changed, and made that the lesson rather than just stewing over being angry about someone really not setting him up for success. And I thought that was an interesting example of stress. Now, from Alex Huberman, who has a podcast about neuroscience and practical applications of it, one of the interesting things he said about stress is that, like, our stress hormones, like cortisol, in many ways, it's better to think of them as focus hormones rather than stress hormones. For example, able to focus, you have to release some cortisol. That's one reason why focusing is sometimes difficult or unpleasant. It's why it's work to get into a focused state. But the reason why that happens is when some danger is going on, your body is flooding you with focus chemicals so you can focus on the dangerous situation and make sure you get out of that. And so again, you think of cortisol, for example, as a stress hormone. It is a focus hormone. And so the idea is, when you are in a state of heightened stress, what do you want to learn? Now, this is really relevant to entrepreneurs, I think, in a particular way. So business is both stressful and overwhelming. And that is the killer of business. Stress hormones dump focus chemicals. They're focus chemicals that help you focus and get tunnel vision. But in business, there is so much to do. And some of that you just can't get around, right? You have to either learn yourself. If you don't have the money to pay an accountant, you have to learn how to do your own finances. Or even if you have the money to find an accountant, you have to divide your time between finding accountants and giving them what they need, and then providing for the business, providing your primary income. If you're not primarily a salesman or a product guy, you also have to work on marketing. If you're a marketing guy, you also have to figure out product development, and splitting your time between those two things can be difficult. So there's a lot going on. And at the same time, when it's stressful to have things fail, to worry about your income, etc., and your brain really wants to focus, you're having to switch between different things. So I think this is one reason why people who get really successful, often what they do is they actually find a way to focus. They find some high leverage activity and do it a ton. Very often you will find early on that they make big mistakes because, as they were hyper focused on something that they were getting really good at, the other things fell through the cracks. But overall, these successful people tend to make it because using that time to focus using the stress hormones to focus and learn and master something was more valuable than the opportunities they lost by trying to divide their attention between different things. And so I'll go back to Alex Hormozi for another example, actually, and then talk about this a little bit in my own life. So I think there are a lot of different ways where he talks about gym launch, and basically he turned over a bunch of gyms, but there was one podcast he was on where he got into some particulars I hadn't heard before, where he's talking about the fact that, so he had this model where he would fly out to different gyms, and his arrangement was that his arrangement with the gym was that he would, for 1 month, get them a whole bunch of new customers, and he would keep the first month's revenue of those customers. And so he was incredibly successful at that and would have had a huge income, except for what these gym people were doing. They were refunding all of those memberships that he sold and telling them they could have half off the first month. And so basically the gyms, and it's not just one, but it was like several of them that did this, realized that they could, instead of giving all of the money to Alex as kind of agreed upon, or as the idea was, they found a way that they could basically screw him out of all of the money and recoup half of the money themselves, which is just like really wow. But that happened in part because he was hyper focused on like the product development, delivering a great service. He wasn't interested in how that could scale. He wasn't focused on like writing the perfect contract to prevent people from gypping him. And you think like, oh, maybe this could fail horribly. But what happened is his focus in this area did eventually turn into another business. So that he'd actually moved his attention to his wife's business for a while and was supporting that. And then he got a call for someone to turn around their gym. And he's like, no, I'm not doing that anymore. And this guy said, show me how to do it. And I'll just pay for your method. And then that's when he realized this person was willing to pay a lot. And instead of having to fly out there himself, do all the work, and then expose himself to a huge amount of risk as people offer refunds, then he could just sell the methodology to people who already knew what he'd done and knew how successful he was. And he was even able to sell that methodology back to some of these people who had gypped him, right? But then since they hadn't acquired the customers themselves and had kind of refunded a bunch of them, would eventually need to like scale up their gym or want to know how he'd done it. So his hyper focus in developing that amazing product, even though there were weak spots in the business model that hamstrung that business at one point, his expertise was able to pivot to another area, and he was able to, work out an area of the product that was more scalable, which wasn't something that he'd been focusing on before. And so that idea, again, is just that there are a lot of things you could be doing in business, but I think a lot of very successful people use the stress to hyper focus on something that seems of most leverage. And if they've actually, done the research, right, he had to develop actual business chops. He wasn't like focusing on perfecting his logo for a year or something relatively low value. But providing you do actually focus on something of high value and actually get good at that, you're in a better position than, for instance, if he had gotten a few clients for them, but it was nothing out of the ordinary, and tried to productize that, but it's kind of a tepid offer since his gyms weren't seeing a huge result. He wouldn't have had the people really willing to pay the thousands to buy the methodology, buy his system, buy his scripts for selling, etc. And so that is an example of how the stress and that urge to focus can really help you in business. And the same is true of me. It's easy for me to bounce around between, different situations. And to a certain extent, I'll admit I'm guilty of this, and I was doing it before my wife had surgery and then had to drastically cut her hours in her entrepreneurship and figure out, is going through the process of figuring out how to rebalance her life. And so that became really clear. And so I wrote down all of my obstacles on a piece of paper. I do like a mind map thing And I said, here are all of like the difficulties in my business, the challenges I'm dealing with, and how am I going to outline them? And, I found that different branches of my business could, be overlapped. If I did this one thing, it would kind of speak to, those two branches. And I streamlined one single plan of action that hit most of my immediate needs and longer term needs where I wanted to position the business. So I didn't have to just like drop some of what I wanted to develop in my business to pursue immediate cash flow, right? And I found a single course of action, and I'm using that stress to hyper focus on this opportunity. So, the specific path that I'm going down, I am niching down, which is something I've experimented in a bunch of different niches. Even within Overthinking Entrepreneurs, there's a lot of different niches, and niches are going to be very different between people who are freelancers versus app developers, etc. And I have a technical background, so that's where most of the people I talk to have some technical dimension to what they do, whether it's building websites, apps, freelancing, even some fintech, etc. So niching down more, focusing on my group offering, and being able to find the high leverage opportunities within that, rather than bouncing around between everything that I do. I am keeping up with the videos, but I'm limiting the amount of time that I'm keeping up with the videos. I'm scaling the videos back. I tried for daily for a week, and that was driving me nuts. And so I'm scaling them back to 2 of my regular videos plus a special video with me and Meg together every week. And then that allows me to focus more. So stress hormones are focus hormones. And one of the big problems of entrepreneurs is, especially overthinking ones like myself, is bouncing between too many options. When you don't see immediate results, bounce to something else and not mastering one area. But since stress hormones are focus hormones, follow the stress, let it help you sit down, find high leverage opportunities and focus, get good at those. And it's okay if that focus means some opportunities go by or some issues arrive. You are much better served in the long run getting really good at one thing, and then you can put that on autopilot and focus on another thing. And focusing on a series of things is, for most people in most circumstances, a lot more effective than doing a little bit at a lot of things, right? So for instance, if you have multiple goals rather than one primary goal, you might make 1%, 2%, 3% progress on all of the goals, but not see any of them get to 100% and have a payoff. And somewhere around like 40 to 60%, you burn out. Whereas if you'd pursued a single goal and just constantly had that stream of 1 to 3% increases in that one area, you would have hit 100%. You would have gotten that reward, achieved that whatever level of success or productivity that you wanted, had the payoff, and then moved on to the next one. You actually would have achieved something rather than burning out and not finishing any of those areas. So let me tell you a parable that also might be helpful, or a little example that I noticed this weekend. So it was raining off and on. It had been a very dry summer, and then it rained like Texas does. It's a downpour. I wouldn't want to go out weeding in that rain. It would be drenched and be miserable. But right after the rain, there's a period where the ground is still wet, and it is fantastic for weeding. And I think that same approach can be true of stress. When we're hit by a lot of stress, it can be a downpour. It can be miserable to try and, learn from that stress. Like if it's one particular moment, like an embarrassing moment, like I shared at the beginning with the onstage embarrassment, that might be a good time to be like, all right, what do I want to learn right now? But if it's a longer period of time that is constantly difficult, like this summer with surgery and my wife being bedridden, it wasn't the greatest time to be able to grow my business. I had to maintain it. I was in crisis mode. I was doing a little bit here and there what I could for clients, but I just didn't have the capacity to hunker down, focus, and really work on one individual thread of my business and develop something entirely new, for example. However, now that we've gotten a little bit of distance and, Meg's health is up some days more than others, and the kids are in school, right? I have some time to focus, but I still have a relatively high degree of stress. I haven't, like, that hasn't gone all the way down. So I still have the focus ability, but now I have more time and resources to do something about it. So a key opportunity around stress for entrepreneurs is once you've had a crisis, don't immediately go into vacation mode. That take breaks, but maybe consider, don't like tune out or take a week, take a week off or take multiple days off. Maybe lean into the focus you still have from all of those focus hormones in your body from the crisis event, and let yourself figure out what is the highest leverage thing in my business and lean into that for a little while and reward yourself with a break after you've used some of that focus, all those focus chemicals in your brain to good effect, rather than letting them drain out and returning to your usual divided attention self, spreading yourself thin between multiple different areas. So to recap, stress can be a good thing. It's not always a bad thing. And in fact, stress hormones are focus hormones. Also, stress tends to really engrave lessons on your brain. So it's a great time to learn, as long as you are learning and focusing on one thing. If you are unfortunately trying to do many things at once and you're stressed out, your stress will just compound without getting the benefit of stress, i.e. the learning to focus on one thing, which is what stress is designed for. So let stress help you focus on a high leverage activity and make a lot of progress in it. There may be risks, there may be things that fall out along the way, but you're much better served by mastering one area of your business than by making limited progress in many. Until next week, make big changes, one small habit at a time.